once you finish kind of making the case for strategic planning, people always ask, well, what are the component parts, and then what role should the constituent elements be playing? I start out by emphasizing the partnership. Even though I will talk about the role the board should play, I run into just enough boards who have deep corporate experience and see kind of the corporate practice of the board running the strategic planning process as the way it should be done. And that's just not consistent with either the culture but also with the very nature of the enterprise of higher ed. So it is a collaborative process, it is a partnering process. As far as the role the board can most readily play, obviously to be supportive, obviously to ensure that planning takes place. But once that's happening, then to work with the president and the senior staff to identify those places where a board can play a more direct role. And I'm a proponent of the board playing a very active role in the kind of envisioning process that the campus and the board should go through in looking at the mission and looking out at the environment once you've done an environmental scan and saying, if we're going to be successful, we probably need to look like this. And there are things we shouldn't be doing, there are things we need to do better, and there are some things we aren't doing that we probably need to do. And I think a board, if it's well composed, can be really invaluable in contributing to that part of the process. So once the envisioning has taken place, I think the board also can play a significant role in the environmental scan. Most board members are deeply enmeshed in their communities, and if they're involved with firms or with enterprises or even with other organizations, they're constantly looking at the environment and looking at their own positioning in terms of the environment. So there's a real value to the board at least looking at the whole area of the environmental scan. And then as the process unfolds, and at those key touch points along the way, decision points along the way, the board can help with prioritizing. If the campus community is getting kind of way out of line, or if the wish list is getting way too long and is inconsistent with the resources of the institution, the board shouldn't be setting the priorities, but the board should be questioning the priorities which seem to be evolving. So I'd say those areas, envisioning, the environmental scanning, the strategic thinking throughout, and then prioritizing are the key areas where the board can play a role. Another place where in the course of the planning process, the board needs to raise a serious question, and that is about ensuring that resources are going to be available for the major strategic initiatives. And oftentimes, that's a place where the board needs to be pretty well informed half to two-thirds of the way through the process, because you don't want to be caught at the end with the board having to say no to certain priorities simply because we don't have the resources or we're not going to be able to develop them. So there needs to be that balancing. A really good process wouldn't have the board directly engaged in that, but simply kind of commissioning the president and senior leadership team to be doing that. But sometimes the board does have to raise that question. And then ultimately the board can give its blessing. I mean, obviously it's going to approve the plan once the plan is completed. And if it's had a role to play along the way and feels good about the plan, ensures the financing. But then beyond that, if the board also kind of rethinks its own way of operating and its own focus, and to some extent its organization around the new plan, it might look at the way it's been operating. Is that going to be functional? Is that going to be helpful in monitoring for fulfillment of the strategic priorities? Are the committees really set up so that they can assist in the process of monitoring the long way? I've been suggesting to boards across the country that they at least think about shaping their committee structure a bit around the strategic responsibilities of the board and the strategic priorities of the institution. So maybe not just having the traditional board committees which look like the administrative structure of the institution, but maybe thinking strategically about, well, what might our committees look like? And also giving some thought to how you're going to use board retreats, periodic larger board reflection processes to link up with the strategic plan and to kind of weigh the success in the implementation of the plan.